I've been thinking about something almost contradictory to what I've been talking about lately. I've talked about faithfulness and consistency, not giving up too early, planting seeds and being willing to wait years before the harvest. I believe all of that. But there's another side of faithfulness that I don't think that we talk about enough. Sometimes you need to stop. Sometimes you need to let something go. Sometimes the season is over. And I think knowing the difference between perseverance and stubbornness might be one of the hardest forms of wisdom because quitting too early can cost us something beautiful, but refusing to let go of something God is finished with, it can cost us too. I've done both. There have been times that I've wanted to quit something because it was difficult. That's not necessarily a reason to stop. Marriage gets difficult, parenting gets difficult, building something gets difficult, following Jesus gets difficult. Anything meaningful really eventually asks something from you. Difficulty alone isn't direction. That's important because if every hard season becomes evidence that we're on the wrong road, we'll never stay anywhere long enough to build anything. But I've also had seasons where I kept trying to force something because I had already invested so much into it: time, money, energy, emotion, even parts of my identity. And once you've given something years of your life, walking away can feel like admitting those years were wasted. So you keep going, not necessarily because God is asking you to, but because you can't bear the thought of letting it go. That's different. And I've started asking myself, am I holding on to this because I'm being faithful or because I'm afraid of what it means to release it? That's an uncomfortable question because sometimes we become attached not only to things, but to versions of our future: the career we thought we'd have, the business we thought would work, the place we thought we'd live, the relationship we thought would last forever, the dream that we thought God was going to be fulfilling in a certain way. We don't just grieve the thing, we grieve the future we built around it. And that's real grief. I don't think faith requires pretending otherwise. There's a story in scripture I've been thinking about. Samuel had anointed Saul as king. Then Saul repeatedly disobeyed God. Eventually, God had rejected Saul as king, and Samuel grieved. Then God said something to Samuel: "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel?" Then God told Samuel to fill his horn with oil and go, because there was another king to anoint: David. The story gets me because Samuel wasn't grieving something meaningless. He'd invested in Saul. He had hoped for Saul and prayed. He had been part of Saul's story. And yet there came a point where God essentially said, "Samuel, you cannot stay here forever. There is still something ahead of you. Fill your horn and go." I wonder how many times we stay staring at something that's over while God is already pointing towards what's next. Not because what happened didn't matter, not because we shouldn't grieve, but because grief isn't supposed to become our permanent address. Ecclesiastes says that there's a season for everything: a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to search and a time to give up. That's scripture. There's a time to give up, not because giving up is always good, because seasons exist and seasons change. There's something natural, and there's something that nature also understands better than we do. A tree, it doesn't desperately hold on to every leaf forever. There comes a season when letting go is part of staying alive. Maybe some things in our lives work that way too. The problem is, how do you know? How do you know when you're supposed to persevere and when you're supposed to release? I wish there was a simple formula that I could tell you. And the truth is, I don't think there is. But I think there are questions worth asking. First, is this something that God has actually commanded me to remain faithful to? Because some commitments aren't disposable just because they're difficult. If I've made a covenant, if scripture is clear, my feelings don't get in the final vote. There are things faithfulness means staying with. And but there are other things: a particular job, maybe a business, maybe part of life, a strategy, maybe a project or a house, an opportunity, a plan. Those aren't necessarily permanent assignments. Sometimes we turn temporary vehicles into sacred obligations. Maybe God called you to start something because of what starting it would teach you. That doesn't automatically mean that you're supposed to do it forever. That's been freeing for me to understand because I think sometimes we assume that changing direction means the original direction was a mistake. But that's not necessarily true. Think about the seasons of life. Something can be right for one season and completely wrong for the next. There are responsibilities I have today that I didn't have 5 years ago. There may be things God asks of me 10 years from now that wouldn't make much sense today. Faithfulness isn't always repeating yesterday's assignment. Sometimes it's recognizing today's. Another question that I've started asking myself is, what kind of fruit is this producing? Jesus said that a tree is recognized by its fruit. So, what is this producing in me? What is it producing in my family, my relationship with God, my character, my responsibilities? Again, hardship doesn't automatically mean bad fruit. Some difficult seasons produce incredible character. But if something repeatedly requires me to compromise what I know is right, neglect responsibilities God clearly gave me, become someone I didn't want to become, or sacrifice everything important to preserve one thing, I think that's worth examining. Sometimes, sometimes we become so committed to saving one dream that we'll sacrifice the life that the dream was supposed to serve. I never want to do that. I don't want to build something for my family while losing my family building it. I don't want to pursue success while becoming someone I wouldn't respect if I met him. I don't want to accomplish the goal and discover the price was everything that the goal was meaning. So fruit matters. Counsel matters too. I've noticed when I really want something, I'm incredibly capable of interpreting everything as evidence that I should keep wanting it. We all do that. That's why wise people matter. People who aren't impressed by our excuses. People who love us enough to tell us something that we don't want to hear. Proverbs says that there's safety in an abundance of counselors. Sometimes the person outside of the situation can see what we've come too close to see. And then prayer. Not just God, make this work. I've prayed plenty of prayers like that, but maybe a more surrendered prayer. God, if this is still mine to carry, give me the strength to carry it. And if it isn't, give me the strength and courage to put it down. That's a dangerous prayer because we usually know which answer we want before we ask the question. Surrender, it means allowing God to answer differently. Jesus showed us that in Gethsemane. He prayed honestly, if it is possible, let this pass, let this cup pass from me. But then, not as I will, but as you will. That's surrender. Not pretending that we don't have desires, bringing those desires honestly to God, then placing them underneath His will. I want to become better at that because sometimes I've held on to things with a closed fist while asking God to bless them. Maybe the better posture is an opened hand. God, this dream is yours. This career is yours. This opportunity is yours. This plan is yours. This thing that I've built is yours. If you want me to keep carrying it, I will. If you want me to release it, help me release it. That's terrifying. But there's freedom there too, because an open hand doesn't have to desperately protect everything. And maybe that's the deeper issue. Sometimes we're afraid that if we let go, there will be nothing afterwards. What if that was my only opportunity? What if I never build anything like this again? What if I don't know who I am without it? What if the next chapter isn't better? Those fears are real. But faith, it doesn't require knowing what replaces the thing that you're releasing. Abraham was told to leave his country without receiving the entire map first. Sometimes God, He asks us to leave something before we fully understand where it's going and where we're going. And maybe that's why letting go actually requires trust, because I'm not merely trusting that God will give me something better. And that's an important distinction. We sometimes turn surrender into another transaction. I'll give this up because God is definitely going to replace it with something bigger. Maybe, maybe not. God doesn't owe me an upgraded version of everything that I surrender. I'm trusting God Himself, even if the next season looks smaller, even if fewer people understand it, even if I make less money, even if the thing that I release never comes back in another form. The promise isn't that every surrender produces an earthly upgrade. The promise is that God remains God. And maybe that's enough. I've also learned that letting go doesn't mean that the previous season was wasted. That's huge. Maybe the business failed, but you learned how to lead. Maybe the opportunity ended, but you met someone who changed your life. Maybe you spent years developing a skill, and now that skill serves something completely different. Maybe you walk through pain, and now you can sit with someone experiencing the exact same thing. God seems incredibly capable of reusing things. Nothing has to be wasted. That's part of redemption. The chapter can end without the chapter becoming meaningless. I think that some of us need permission to understand that because sunk costs is powerful. I've already spent 5 years on this. Okay, those 5 years happen. The question isn't how do I justify the last 5 years? The question is, what is faithfulness asking of me now? That's different. You don't honor yesterday by sacrificing tomorrow to do it. Take the lessons, take the wisdom, take the character, take whatever God formed in you. And if it's time, walk forward. There's something else about endings. They create room. A closed hand can't receive anything new. A schedule completely filled with yesterday's responsibilities has no room for today's assignment. Sometimes pruning is necessary because growth requires space. Jesus talked about the Father pruning branches that bear fruit so that they can become even more fruitful. Think about that. The branch being cut isn't necessarily dead, it's fruitful, and still something gets removed. That's challenging because sometimes we assume that God would only ask us to release bad things, but maybe sometimes He's asking us to release good things because they're not no longer the thing that He's asking from us. A good thing can still become the wrong assignment. And that's why I don't want to just have a life full of good things. I want a life aligned with what God is actually asking me to carry. And I know I won't discern that perfectly. None of us will. There's going to be times where I stop too soon, times I stay too long, times that I misunderstood. But I trust that God is capable of redirecting someone who genuinely wants to follow Him. I don't need perfect discernment to have a surrendered heart. So maybe there's something in your life you're trying to decide whether to keep carrying, and I can't tell you from a video whether you should put it down or not. And be careful with anyone who thinks that they can. But I think you can begin asking better questions. Is this something that God has clearly called me to remain committed to? What fruit is it producing? What are wise people who know me seeing? Am I preserving because of conviction or because of fear, pride, identity, or sunken cost? Have I actually given God permission to say, it's time? And if after all that you believe that you're supposed to stay, then stay. Stay faithfully. Stop looking for an exit every time it gets difficult. Water the field. Do the work. Trust God with the harvest. But if you become convinced the season really is over, then don't call fear faithfulness. Open your hand. Grieve what needs to be grieved. Thank God for whatever the season has gave you. Take the lessons with you and walk. Because faithfulness isn't always staying. Sometimes faithfulness is having the courage to leave something behind without knowing exactly what's ahead. There's a time to plant, there's a time to harvest, there's a time to preserve, and there's a time to let go. Wisdom is learning the difference, and faith is trusting God in both. So I hope this brought something to you today. I hope it gave you some sort of value for your life. And hey, I just appreciate you for being here. And until the next one, man, peace.